Hello and welcome to Recovery Weekly, an interactive weekly program used to guide you, the family member of an individual with a substance abuse problem, through the process of recovery. I'm your host, Scott Kaline, joined as always by my co-host, Ian Koch. Ian is a licensed drug and alcohol counselor, as well as an internationally certified addiction specialist for NortheastAddictionConsultant.com. Thanks for joining me, Ian.
Absolutely. Good morning.
Good morning. As always, this show is interactive, so if you have any questions for myself, Ian, or Gene Campbell, who is our guest today, please enter them on the right of the screen. And Gene Campbell is a director of Action Institute of California. She's also a certified trainer, educator, and practitioner by the American Board of Examiners in Psychodrama, Sociometry, and Group Psychotherapy. She's a master's level certified experiential therapist, an EMDR practitioner, a level 2 Reiki practitioner, a fellow of the American Society of Group Psychotherapy and Psychodrama, and a practitioner of trainer of psychodramatic bodywork. Thanks for joining us today, Gene.
My pleasure. Good morning.
Morning. That's a pretty lengthy resume you have there.
Well, you've been around the block a few times. Yes, the resume does add up.
Now, I'd like to start by getting into exactly what psychodrama is and how you found yourself focusing on its methods in your work.
Well, psychodrama is a method that was created by a physician, actually, named Jacob Moreno. And it's been around for a long time, contrary to what most people think. And rather than just talking about our challenges, our issues, our concerns in a family system, for example, we actually get up and put it into action. We choose other people to play roles, and it's kind of a sophisticated form of role play. It's a way to revisit scenes that might have been challenging for us and to practice new behaviors and to kind of undo and redo our behaviors, our thoughts, our actions, so that we can move forward into a better place in our lives.
And I watched your appearance at the TED Talks in Conejo Valley, California, which is really cool to be asked to do that. I've been following that for maybe 6 or 7 years now, and some really big names get on there and give presentations. Now, you had a man come up on stage and pretty much work through his internal battle that he'd been having between his family and his job, and he couldn't make a decision. What is the purpose of using the different roles in someone's head, or their psyche, to fight against each other, or to, I don't know what it is exactly?
Well, if you're familiar with the stages of change model, pre-contemplation, contemplation, preparation, action, etc., that exercise was kind of a playoff on that. In that contemplation stage, people are really in a state of ambivalence. Do I want to do this? Do I want to do that? Do I want to go this way? Do I want to go that way? And one of the beauties of psychodrama is that, we all have these voices going on in our heads at all times. That doesn't make us schizophrenic or multiple personality. It's just, I think it's a human trait that we have these different voices. And so by using psychodrama in that exercise, the protagonist, which is what we call the main person in psychodrama, could explore those two different voices through action and actually hear them from the outside of himself, move them around on the stage, and explore all kinds of different options. And in the case of that presentation, just as an aside, those were my students who participated in it. It wasn't some random guy I pulled out of the audience.
Okay.
But by exploring it through action, you can try on a bunch of different options and then kind of tune into which one it fits the most for you at any given time. And, if you'd asked 10 different people to do that exercise, it would have manifested in 10 different ways. And that's kind of the exciting nature of psychodrama, is that we never know where it's going to go, but ultimately the protagonist is going to get to some kind of conclusion for him or herself. So in that case, the protagonist was really struggling with, do I pursue my values and run the risk of losing money in the short term, maybe having my family upset with me because we may not live at the kind of the lifestyle level we've been accustomed to living at? Or do I follow my vision and trust that the universe is going to provide for me? I mean, it's a very kind of spiritual leap to take that risk. And yet that's what the protagonist knew in his heart that he wanted and needed to do.
Excellent. And what's that? Sorry.
I just say what's really nice about psychodrama is it can give families an insight into the ambivalence that an addict has when they're trying to get sober. And that's why you hear it often with working with families where, Jimmy says, okay, I want to get sober. He goes to the first day of the IOP program and then says, you know what, I've got this, I can do it on my own, or whatever, and then he's gone. And it's also why so many treatment programs, their admissions departments have people who are 24 hours a day on call, because when the addict is ready to get sober, they're ready to get sober, but that ambivalence in the contemplative state, it really, I think of it as like a teeter-totter, and it's just a little bit of weight on one side could tip the whole thing in the whole other direction. So it helps for families to get insight on it.
I've done that exercise many times with family members too, because they have their own ambivalence.
Yeah.
Do I stop enabling and allow my loved one to hit bottom so that he or she will finally get into recovery, or do I continue to enable because I'm so afraid something horrible is going to happen if I don't? I actually used to run a multifamily group years ago in a treatment center in New York City, and a lot of times we would do a psychodrama exploration where one of the addicts in the room would choose somebody to play the role of their disease. And the disease would literally follow them around the room. It was just relentless. It wouldn't leave them alone, and it was pestering them and saying, come on, let's go out, let's get loaded. We can't do this. We can go have fun with our friends, and then I would have the protagonist try to figure out some way to keep some distance between themselves and that voice. And they could choose people to play their sponsor, or they could choose somebody to play their higher power or other tools of recovery. And the family members would often sit there with their mouths open, like, I had no idea that this voice is going on in their head 24/7 and never leaves them alone. And then I'd really throw them for a loop, because then I'd have a family member do the same exercise. And the voice would often say things like, if you don't take care of your son, he's going to end up in jail. Or if you don't take care of your daughter, she's going to end up dead, which of course is every parent's worst nightmare when it comes to addiction. And it would really give them an opportunity to explore that through action as well and see what other options they had. Because for most people in that position, I either get to do this or this. And it's really exploring that gray area that can make a huge difference for people to have an option that they never even considered.
It helps for everyone to see that it's not as simple as just choosing not to use.
Yeah, and to be able to explore a bunch of different options and get help doing it, which, as we know, is the key to recovery, whether you're the Al-Anon or whether you're the recovering addict or alcoholic. It takes a village to get better. It's just that simple. Not a lot of people don't want to admit that, but that's part of the recovery process. So,
getting back to the idea of the addiction plaguing the individual, you were on VH1 Celebrity Rehab, and you did an exercise with Leif Garrett where you actually separated the addiction, and you had Jeremy London play the role, and just to see how much of a visceral reaction you could get out of Leif Garrett, because to him, I think in that very moment it was real. Like, he was facing his demons head on, and
absolutely,
for the first time they'd materialized before him, and you actually had to go out and get a pad so he'd stop pushing Jeremy London head on, like a little barrier between you two. That was good. But do you tend to see a cathartic reaction out of people that you do this therapy with, or what's the usual response?
It all depends upon what they're trying to explore, but there's a wonderful expression by Jacob Moreno's wife, Zerga, is actually still alive. And she's been just an incredible powerhouse in the spreading of the good word, if you will, about psychodrama internationally for decades. And she has always said that your protagonist doesn't owe you a catharsis. It's not always that big. I mean, that was a big anger release. And yeah, as a psychodramatic body worker, I have equipment that we use for people to do those kinds of big anger releases, because, the work we do is not about violence, but it is about getting that kind of emotion out of the body. Every protagonist is going to have a different kind of catharsis. For some people, a single small tear streaming down their face is just as big a catharsis as you saw Leif Garrett do in terms of hitting a tackle dummy. Sometimes the catharsis is much more subtle in that you don't really see it, but there's a major shift that has gone on inside of someone. But we are in psychodrama, we are always moving towards a catharsis of some kind, whether that's what we call an reactive catharsis, where it's that big emotion that you saw, or we also have what we call a catharsis of integration, where it's really about practicing a new behavior. We call it role training. So, for example, sometimes I've done workshops where it's just about practicing, with somebody who's newly sober. It's about practicing, here's a situation, and we're going to set it up and practice it in action. Here's a situation, for example, where your drug dealer calls you. What are you going to do? So you may not have a huge emotional catharsis, but you're going to give the person an opportunity to practice a bunch of different ways of handling that. And that might be, exploring options like, hey, I could get a new cell phone number, or I could just not answer the phone, or I could call my sponsor when the phone rings. Instead of answering it with my Coke dealer, I can call my sponsor, go to a meeting, just to explore all of those options that when we're challenged with those kinds of situations, we can't think. I mean, when somebody's in fear, this part of the brain, the logic and reasoning center, it's like the fuse trips and it goes offline and people can't think straight. So one of the beauties, particularly with addiction and codependency issues for the family members, is by exploring it in action in a safe environment, you can practice it so that when the situation actually happens, you already know what to do. It's already anchored in your body. It's kind of like having a fire drill, when the alarm goes off, think about how to get out of the building. We just do it. And it's the same kind of thing with psychodrama. You can practice it so that when the situation arises, you already know what to do. And that I've done that a lot with family members over the years too. What are you going to do when your son calls you and asks you for money? What are you going to do when your husband is hungover and wants you to call his boss? How are you going to handle that? So to practice it in a safe environment, and it can be life-changing for people.
Excellent. And I know, Ian, you probably see that a lot in your stuff too, where you need to prep these people before, the parents of an addict or the loved one of an addict. You need to make sure that they're on the same page before that the questions even get brought up. Where they are gonna come back at you with this, "Mom, I need money," or "Dad, can you give me a ride to the mall?" And you have to be ready for this sort of thing, right?
Yeah, and and that's where, I said it. I say it, I guess, maybe last week. I had a mother, it was actually a sister, call me, or a daughter of a gentleman call me, and she said, we're looking for help, et cetera, et cetera. We know all about addiction. We understand it. We understand enabling, but we're looking for some help to figure out how to stop this from happening. And I said, okay, well, what we do is 8 sessions, da-da-da-da-da. It's just under $500. It's $475. She said, that's way too much money. I can't afford that. We just sent him $500 yesterday.
Right.
I said, why did you send him $500? I had a moment of where I had my own nonsense was coming up where I just wanted to shake her, and I said, why did you send him $500? Well, he doesn't have a job or have any money. I said, so you're telling me that you sent him $500, all he's doing is sitting at the house and drinking, and you could have used that money to help. And this is a prime example, right? She said exactly what Jean was talking about. She said she knew about addiction. She said she knew how to not enable. Yet here she is enabling as it's happening. So kind of what Northeast Addiction Consultants does with our families, and then with the new program that we've just kind of started, we do the 2 sessions a week on the fly. We do the on the fly emails. So as things are coming up, we're available to really teach people how to do it when it's happening, versus where a lot of therapies, people have to drive somewhere, they sit for an hour, they learn about stuff, they come back a week later. We've developed our model is so it really is kind of like on the ball coaching, which is exactly what the more I listen to Gene talk about psychodrama, I've known a little about it, the more I want to officially train in it, because I find and I know what she's talking about. It's so useful for families, and especially with the model that we use at Northeast Addiction Consultants, it really would help us ultimately help families.
Ian, if I were that woman, I would probably say, if the question were, why did you do that? If I were to get honest with myself in that role, my response would be because I could not do it.
Exactly.
And it's the same thing as addiction. I mean, I'm remembering, and mind you, this is years ago, long before cell phones. Again, when I was running that multifamily group in an outpatient program in New York City, one Monday, this woman showed up. It was a 4-week series that people were in. It was part of an IOP, and this woman showed up, and her husband wasn't with her, and he was the identified addict in the family. Of course, she was also an addict in terms of her own codependency. Yeah. But she showed up one Monday by herself, and I said, "Where's your husband?" And she said, "Oh, he got paid on Friday, and I haven't seen him since." Now, this was, mind you, this was during the crack epidemic in New York City.
Yeah.
And I said to her, "So what did you do?" And she said, "Well, I beeped him." You remember beepers, folks. And what happened? And she said, "Well, I didn't hear from him." And I said, "Well, then what did you do?" She said, "Well, I beeped him again." I said, "And then what happened?" She said, "I didn't hear from him." I said, "Well, what did you do?" She said, "I beeped him again." Well, she beeped him over 1,000 times that weekend. And I said to her, "Now you understand addiction. Doing the same thing again and again and expecting a different result. You beeped him over and over and over again, and you knew he wasn't going to answer you, but you couldn't not do it." And I said to her, it's the same thing, whether it's crack, heroin, alcohol. On some level it's not going to be different, but you cannot stop yourself. The kicker was beeper was turned off and upstairs in his nightstand all weekend.
So it really didn't matter.
And it was good.
And that's the thing. It's the inability to stop. And I knew that. I mean, I kind of gave her that question and that little jab because I wanted her to be able to see that, like, yes, she might have the intellectual knowledge, but the practical application is a whole nother story. It's like the alcoholic who sits at the bar and says, "I'm an alcoholic. I can't stop drinking." And he's drinking, I want to change my life. Yet there's the inability to be able to do so. And if we could just not drink or drug, and if families could just not enable, I wouldn't have a job. Gene, you wouldn't have a job. No, there wouldn't be any treatment centers or anything. People would choose to stop using. Families would choose to stop enabling, and that would be that. But there's a lot more to this that, and you hear it, unfortunately, in 12-step meetings. You hear it I've heard it at IOP programs where one guy is able to, for some reason, just say enough is enough, and he puts it down. Everyone else tries to do that, yet they consistently relapse. There's a difference between that guy and the guy who can't stop. And this is where assessments really need to be thorough. And not that I would say that one guy's not a drug addict, but there's a difference with them. And you also don't know. Some people are able to stop for very long periods of time, and then all of a sudden something happens in their mind, and boom, they're triggered, and all of a sudden they're using again. And this is the problem.
I think it's important also to remember it's a threefold illness, and the physical is only one aspect of it. If people don't do the emotional and spiritual work, it's a matter of time, or they live miserably.
Yeah.
Yeah, but you're right. There's always that one person who, for some reason, has been able to put it down. And who knows, maybe they're a binge drinker or a binge user, and they can go for weeks or months or years without using. And then, as you said, boom, they start, the allergy kicks in, and then they're off to the races. And everybody says, what happened?
Yes. And the sad thing is that it's that one guy that, for some reason, who says, "Oh, just say no," that everybody else wants to listen to. Why? Because it's the easier, softer way.
It's the easier, softer way, or it looks like the easier, softer way.
Yep.
Yeah, that's the truth.
Yeah, that moral responsibility that they think that you can just instantly attain somehow, being an addict and all. And Gene, you said in the past that you have experience with addiction firsthand. Is that correct?
Who, me?
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I'm a recovering alcoholic and other things myself. So yeah, and I also grew up in an alcoholic family. So I I think that's part of what makes me unique in working with families as well, is that I know the disease from both sides.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And now, based on your own family dynamic, do you try to use that in your own therapy, like what you've learned from how your own family operates, and then put it towards the families that you deal with in therapy sessions?
Oh, sure. I mean, I think there's some common dynamics that go on in any family system. There are common fears that go on. I'm also trained in, it's not on my list of credentials because I'm not credentialed in it, but I'm also trained in the systemic invitational model of intervention. And from my perspective, unless you're working systemically in a system, in the family system, if it's not going to, the whole family can't heal if only one person is involved in a recovery process. Now, that doesn't mean everybody has to go to 12-step meetings or everybody has to follow the same spiritual path. But unless there is a change system-wide, I think it makes it very difficult for whether it's the family member who got into recovery first, or whether it's the addict or the alcoholic who got into recovery first. It sets up all kinds of difficult dynamics that go on. And so ideally, when I've worked with families before, I try to get everybody involved in the process right from the start. Some people are more willing than others. But yeah, I certainly bring my own experience, my own feelings, having grown up in the family that I did, multi-generational from what I understand. Addiction issues, and try to give that information to family members, especially in terms of having a sense of hope, because there is hope out there, whether the addict or the alcoholic is still using or not. There's communities of people out there that are on the same path and that can support. So yeah, I mean, I also teach a class at UCLA in family counseling. And I talk to my students about that kind of thing all the time. A lot of what I work with them on is looking at their own family of origin to see what role they were in, to see what dynamics were going on, because that can then make them a better counselor, both in terms of sharing their own process with people, better understanding it, but also in terms of knowing their own blind spots. Because if you've grown up in that kind of a system, there's bound to be some blind spots. And there's a lot of triggers that too in the role of counselor or therapist. So.
Well, we want to thank you for coming on our show today, Jean. It's been great. Now, just before you go, can you tell people how they can get in touch with you and maybe employ your services in the future?
Well, I want to be really clear that I'm not doing therapy at this point. I'm only doing teaching and training and consulting. But if anybody is interested in psychodrama training, I heard that, Ian. I heard that you're interested.
We're going to talk.
Really?
My website is the Action Institute. It's THE, actioninstitute.com, all one word. And my email address is actioninstitute@mac.com.
Okay.
Those are probably the two easiest ways to get a hold of me.
Okay.
Find me through the social media forms as well.
Great, thank you. And if you need help getting your loved one on the path to recovery, please call 1-800-723-1073 for a free consultation, or visit northeastaddictionconsultants.com. Now, Ian, you said you had an announcement to make?
Yeah, I do. We recently just launched a new program specifically for professionals who are addicts as well as parents who are addicts. Similar model to what we use with our families. But it's basically 2 sessions a week via phone and Skype. We can do the sessions at any point in the day, as well as text and email support all day long if necessary for on-the-go issues that may come up, to really support people who don't necessarily have time to go to rehab, or people who are not interested or don't want to do 12-step recovery or just don't have time. So we're really trying to branch out and add some extra services in. We've gotten a lot of calls recently from actually fathers, a lot of fathers who have little kids that are struggling with alcohol or pills or whatever. So we decided to formally launch a new service for professionals and parents, and you can check that out on our website under the tab for the addict alcoholic.
Great. And make sure you tune in next week when we have Jack Lavino, a psychotherapist who specializes in addiction and trauma recovery. And until then, we here at Northeast Addiction Consultants wish you and your loved one a safe journey to recovery.